the guitar key of G in open D minor has a couple of interesting examples I want to show. I used to have sorted out more songs in this category of the open D minor key of G, but some of them eventually switched to other. So I don't have too many examples, but this is one that sticks in this tuning. I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. Another road where maybe I could see another kind of life there. And I suddenly see you. Did I tell you I need you every single day of my life? I'd like to get you in my life. So what's interesting there is it's got this kind of mixodylian mode implied as G and F. And then it's using the B minor chord for a descending walk down. And that's the same one we've seen before. It's B minor major 7, or the augmented B minor 7, B minor 6. And this one, it walks them down pretty fast. So that's the key of G with the B minor chord descending progression. And well, that was a sort of an early song, and then going later in the career we have Cry, baby, cry, make your mother sad. You're old enough to know better. Cry, baby, cry. The king of America was in the kitchen cooking breakfast for the queen. The queen was in the parlor playing for the children of the king. So the open D minor is a compelling tuning for that, because you have all of those chords in 6-string harmony, whereas if you were playing like the A minor, little bit challenged here in the open position because it's got the E on in the bass, and also you just can't match that descending minor chord progression. So here we have the key of G. And then they're using the E minor chord. And what's really cool about this is the way it walks down the hair. I'm only 2 frets above the nut, and I want to walk down 3 frets. So this is E minor. This is the minor major 7. This is the major 7. But now I've run out of room on that string, so the 6th is here. And what they do is they put the bar. So that's the E minor 6. And so you have this example where you're using the notes behind the bar, and then you switch to notes in front of the bar. So that makes that E minor descending progression a little bit more interesting than the F minor, with that very cool E minor 6 chord. And so it's an interesting comparison. The first one is walking down, it's G, and then walking down in the 3 chord. chord, the 3 minor chord, and this one is G, and it's walking down on the 6 minor chord. Here's another song in G. Sha-la-la-la-la. Fake out begin. It's not the way you smile that touches my heart. It's not the way you kiss that tears me apart. But how many nights go by? I sit alone at home and cry over you. Can't help myself, but baby it's you. Baby it's you. So that's a single string lead on the bass string, which is kind of cool. But otherwise that song is pretty much just a shameless 1, 6, 4, 4, 5. Now the key of B flat is a wonderful key in this tuning, and this song is one of my personal favorites. Let me tell you about a girl I know. She's my baby and I love her so. Every morning when the sun comes up, she brings me coffee in my favorite cup. Yes, I love her, yeah, I do. She's my girl. And when I call her on the telephone and I tell her that I'm all alone, by the time I count from 1 to 4, I hear her knocking on my back door. In the evening when the sun goes down and there's nobody else around, she kisses me and she holds me tight. She tells me everything will be alright. That's why I know, yes I know. Hallelujah, baby, she's my girl. When I'm in trouble and I have no friends, so stick with me until the end. Everybody asks me how I know. I smile at her and say she told me so. That's why I know, yes I know. Hallelujah, I just love her so. So that song is sort of prototypical of the key of B flat. This is B flat, this is B flat 7, and this is B flat augmented. And again, it's refreshing how the B flat comes down on the B7. So I'm recognizing that as a boundary chord where this D7, it couldn't go any lower. It could go higher if I use a bar or something, but that B flat is like a bottom chord, and when I see that, it kind of tells me that that's the open position. And again, that B flat can go to the B minor, but it can also go to the D minor. So it's one of the changes I'm looking for, is that B flat to B minor is an interesting interval. It's a flat 6 relation. Your day breaks, mine makes you find wakes up, she makes up, she takes her time, she doesn't feel she has to hurry, she no longer needs you. And in her eyes you see nothing, no sign of love behind the tears cried from no one. A love that should have lasted years. If I Fell in Love with You has one of these introductions where the key is not obvious until the last chord, and it kind of spins your head around, and it's got this melodic hook. If I fell in love with you, would you promise to be true and help me understand? 'Cause I've been in love before, and I found that love was more than just holding hands. Now this is a hard way. If I give my heart to you, I must be sure from the easy way, very start, that you would love me more than her. If I trust in you, oh please, please, don't run and hide. If I love you too, oh please, don't hurt my pride like her. I couldn't stand the pain, and I would be sad if our new love was in vain. So it's got that diatonic progression. And then between the 3 and the 2 chord, it has this interesting approach chord, which is D flat. So it's D minor, D flat, C minor, B flat. Whereas this open position one goes B flat at your C minor, the difficult C minor chord, open D minor, and the D flat approach chord onto the C minor. That introduction, it brings to mind the drove old Dixie down, the night they drove old Dixie down progression. It's been a long time now, I'm coming back home. I've been away now, oh how I've been alone. Wait till I come back to your side, we'll forget the tears we cried. If your heart breaks, don't wait, leave me alone. Your heart strong, hold on now. Wait till I come back to your side, we'll forget the tears we cried. I feel as though you ought to know that I've been good as I can be. And if you do, trust in you. So that's another good B flat song. And then I can't leave the key of B flat without Bésame Mucho, which is a sort of G minor kind of thing, but it's related to B flat. Bésame, bésame mucho. Each time I cling to your kiss, I feel really divine. Bésame, bésame mucho. Hold me, my darling, and say that you'll always be mine. This joy is something new. My arms enfolding you. I never knew this thrill before. Whoever thought I'd be holding you, whispering it's you I adore. So that's a classic open D minor song. It's making use of the G minor key, which has its 5th chord here and its 4th chord here, so it's nicely spaced, and then it modulates to that G7, C minor. And something else I like about Bésame Mucho is on the 4 chord, so we got Bésame, bésame mucho. So it's got an ascending minor chord progression. We haven't run into this one yet, but it starts with the minor chord and it's walking up from the 5th. +5, 6, and then it turns around and walks down in the descending progression. So this is a progression that occurs in several other songs where you walk up from the minor and then the ending, cha-cha-cha. So let's just go over the open position chords, because one way to learn a new tuning is you start by learning the open position chords. So obviously you have E minor, E7, D minor, D major, E7, D6, E augmented, and then you have G, that's the bar G, that's the open position G, the open position G minor, and then the A chord is a kind of a little bit impaired in the open position because it's this bar with 2 fingers that makes the 7, and it's a little bit of an impaired chord because it's a little bit hard to play or slide around, and it's also not exactly the best voicing, but this A chord gives rise to this minor. There's A minor chord, but it's hard to do that walk down and the A that you have in standard tuning, like in Bert Jansch's Angie, that A minor slash G, A minor slash F sharp, down to the E. So it's a little bit different, but there is a really good A minor key that I'll show. Okay, so I'm gonna put a capo here on the 2nd fret, and that'll give me a kind of a fake E minor, open E minor tuning. So the notes on without the capo, D, A, D, F, A, D, Dad Fad. Not to be confused with Dad Gad, Dad Fad. And then when in the open D minor, what we have are the notes are E, B, E, G, B, E, or E, B, G, B. That's how you would pronounce it, E, B, G, B. And I think that's the origin of the word heebie-jeebies, like you gave me the heebie-jeebies. And if you look it up, it'll tell you that the word heebie-jeebie was first used in the Pogo comic strip in 1927 or something like that. But I think it's an older word, and I think it comes from this minor tuning, and the kind of minor modality is where you get the word EBGB. So it's also a way to remember what the notes are. E, B, E, G, B, E. Pronounced EBGB. But this is a fake E minor tuning because the capo is the same form, but it shortens the strings and it makes them a little tinier, and you can't go as far up on the neck as you can without having the capo. And when you're playing near the capo in sort of the open position, it's easy to keep track of that reference frame. But when you're playing high on the neck with the capo, it gets really confusing because the dots lose their meaning, and so you up here it's much harder to keep the 2-fret reference range that the capo makes. So this is a way to sort of explore open E minor, but it's not quite the same thing. So I do have one more song in the key of G, and that's Revolution 1. With this. Say you want a revolution, well you know we all want to change the world. You would tell me that it's evolution, well you know we all want to change the world. When you talk about destruction, no you can carry out. Don't you know it's gonna be alright? It's gonna be alright. So the reason why I think that's not in open D major is because of that minor chord, which you could play in open D major, but it's a little bit harder of a reach. And then the way it falls down on the open chord, this is the boundary chord that's telling me where the bottom is. And then I like the cadence of that. And this lick, it's a little bit hard to play in this tuning. It's got this hammer on from the open, and then it jumps. So I think that'd actually be easier to play in open G, open A. And what I think is they have two guitars. One is in open E, and one is in open A, and they both give that a bright, modern tonality because they're the intonation a little bit higher than the standard tuning that you expect with, say, open D minor and open G. Would give it a lower timbre and a more of a country sound. So I think that's an example. I'm not completely sure where you can tell that they're using two differently tuned guitars. I think it's very common that they use guitars in 2 different tunings or keys, but there's only about 5 or 10 songs where I can clearly tell that, like in Michelle, there's no doubt that there's 2 different tunings, but a lot of times you just kind of wonder if they aren't getting this rich tonality from 2 different tunings, but you can't separate out the guitars. Now, according to the mathematic theory, you're always going to be able to recover the guitar tuning from the music if you have an adequate sample. So, you know, if you hear the guy playing for an hour or 2 in the same tuning, you're going to figure out what the tuning is without having to see where he's playing the notes. The problem comes with these short licks and these progressions where you don't have all of the information, and then it becomes kind of a puzzle to solve. What is the tuning that they're using? But one thing that's always sure is that there is a tuning that they compose the song in and they play on the record. There is one particular tuning that's a distinguished state that is better than all of the other tunings for that song. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you. About that song is that C minor 6, and you know you should be glad. And so just once again, what I like about this that makes it different than standard tuning is the 6-string matching chords. That are spaced up and down the neck in a very convenient way. They're not all crowded down into the open position, and they're spread out across the neck in a way that's useful. Hello, little girl. Hello, little girl. I see you every day, I say, hello, little girl. When I see you passing your way, I say, hello, little girl. When I see you passing by, I cry. Hello, little girl. When I try to catch your eye, I cry. Hello, little girl. Hello, I send you flowers, but you don't care. You never seem to see me standing there. one of George Harrison's early compositions, and it's a simple song, but I kind of like it because it kind of reminds me of the songs that my friends and I have been writing all over these years, and it is kind of simple, it's expressive, and it's easy to play. So that song would be in the key of, well, I was playing in the key of G, but since it's in open E minor, it would be in the key of A. And then I want to compare it to You Know What to Do is another Harrison composition. It's also in the key of A, but now it's in the key of A in this tuning. So that one goes. When I see you, I just don't know what to say. I'd like to be with you every hour of the day. So if you want me, just like I want you, you know what to do. Watching you and you look so alone. I hope you mind if I walk you back home. But if you want me, just like I need you, you know what to do. Just call on me when you're lonely, and I'll keep my love for you only, and I'll call on you if I'm lonely too. So Walter Everts was complaining about that song because he felt that it didn't have the right resolution. It was because he felt it was trying to resolve from the 2 chord, the B minor, directly down to the A without going through the 5th chord. But actually, I think it's a great song, and I think it really works on guitar. And again, it's not one of their greatest hits, but it's a little guitar jewel, and it's got that same descending minor progression, and this time it's with the key of A with the 2 chord that walks down. Another song that Walter Everts reported that the Beatles were kind of sheepish about, kind of embarrassed about, was One After 909, which I always thought was a great song. So it was kind of like looking at it, wondering, well, what is it that embarrasses the Beatles about this song? And it's kind of a question of whether it's in the recorded key of B flat. It made me think it was in open G for a long time, because open G has a really good B flat key. But I think it makes more sense that it would be in either open D minor or open D major, and then which would make the key A. And so you have this kind of thing. Oh, my baby said you're leaving on the 1 after 909. I said, move over, baby, I'm traveling on that line. I said, move over once, move over twice. Come on, baby, don't really matter the size. My baby says you're leaving on the 1 after 909. I've got my bag, run to the station. The mailman says you got the wrong location. I've got my bag, run back home. Then I find I got the number wrong. Baby said we're leaving on the 1 after 9:09. I said, move over, honey, I'm traveling on that line. I said, move over once, move over twice. Come on, baby, don't be cold as ice. I said, my baby got me coming on the 1 after 9:09. So from that point, I can see that what they're a little bit embarrassed about is it's just such a straightforward blues in the key of A, and it's got that kind of interesting use of the 2 chord, and then the other thing about it is it could be in B flat, because B flat would give you the matching set of chords. But in A, you fall down on that the 4 chord in the open position, and you have the ostinato boogie bass line. So A is the key that has its 4th chord in the open position, and its 5th chord above it, like at the 2nd position. Now, the 2 major chords in this tuning, you have this bar, that's F, and then you have I call it the bar with 1 finger, and then the bar with 2 fingers, that's C. And so you can kind of do an exercise where you go march the bar up 1 fret at a time and change between those chords, so it would be, whoops. So this is appears in the like Dreamers Do, where you have this intro. I saw the girl of my dreams, and so it seems that I would love her in the E6 chord, and you are the girl of my dreams, and so it seems that I will love you, oh, and I waited for your kiss, I waited for the bliss, like dreamers do, and Semolifera, oh, I'll be there, the 2 chord, waiting for. So this progression is where it starts at C sharp, sharp, E, A flat, F, B flat, G, D, A. It's not a circle of fifths. It's kind of an interesting progression, because the first one, it's a F to C sharp. No, excuse me, I didn't do that right. F to D. Yeah, that's right. F to C sharp, then C sharp to G. So you get like it goes up a 4th, and then it goes a minor 3rd. And when you look at the Beatles' complete scores, they show that same progression, the same chords, in standard tuning. And so what happens then is for your first chord is this one, C sharp. So you have to play that with a bar and then the C chord in front of it. So that's a 4-finger chord. It's really a hard bar chord. A lot of people can't play this. and I don't think anybody can play this chord really fast. And so then the second one, so they have the C sharp, the second one F sharp. You have to play that in standard tuning with a bar, the standard F kind of bar chord. So that takes 4 fingers. So what they're showing in the Beatles complete score is practically impossible to play, and especially when they play that so fast. Coming up on the A, they play that so fast that there's no way it can be in standard tuning. And that's an example of the problem with the Beatles complete scores. The notes that they're showing in the tablature are correct, but they're so hard to play that they don't make any sense. And so you can't use the Beatles complete scores to learn Beatles guitar because it's just wrong, and it leaves you without any way to go. Like when you figure out you can't play that, then you're sort of just left with the conclusion that, wow, the Beatles are these superhuman guitar players, and they could play stuff that I couldn't play even if I practiced it for 100 years. So, the tuning makes a big difference, because in this tuning, that progression is, it's like you've got, okay, this is 3 fingers and 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 2 fingers, not 4 fingers and 4 fingers going all the way up. So you can play that pretty fast. And the other problem that I have with the Beatles complete scores is they look at the tablature as though they're just showing the guitar parts you hear in the record. So in a lot of songs, the guitar tablature would just be like a few riffs, and they don't look at the songs as though they were composed by the Beatles on guitar, and they have a whole composition with a beginning and an ending and middle and a bridge or whatever that's all composed on guitar. Because that's what I want, like for Lucy in the Sky. I want to understand, how did the Beatles think about it on guitar? And I don't want to have just like the notes that you hear on the record transcribed. I want to see the whole song as a guitar composition. And I also like that the cadence in that song where, at the end, where they go, and that's kind of a Beatles hallmark, is so they're not just throwing 3 or 4 chords together in a canon, like Pachelbel's canon, where the chords just go round and around and around, and they're the same chords over and over until you're, wow, they really got that progression down. What they have is they have the chords spaced out, so maybe they stay on one chord for quite a while, and then all of a sudden there's a series of changes. Or maybe the chords are changing really fast, and then there's a part where they don't change so fast. They make the guitar much more interesting that way. And Like Dreamers Do is another example where the ATV key in the published sheet music doesn't agree with the recording. And so what you have in the sheet music is like a more traditional key of F arrangement. Dreams, I saw the girl of my dreams, and so it seems that I will love her. It's a 6 chord, and you are the girl of my dreams, and so it seems that I will love you. Oh, and I'm waiting for your kiss, I'm waiting for your bliss, like dreamers do. Oh, baby, I'm waiting for you. it's also a good key, but you could see they kind of changed it from the key of F to the key of A to some advantage with that introduction. I've just seen a face, I can't forget the time or place where we just met. The girl for me, and I want all the world to see we met. Falling, yes I am falling, and she keeps calling me back again. So that key of A is the one that has the 6th at the 4th fret, and the 4th in the open, and the 5th at the 2nd fret. My girl don't give me presents. I know that she's no present. Only ever has to give me love forever and forever. My love don't give me presents. Turn me on when I get lonely. People tell me that she's only fooling. I know she isn't. She don't give boys the eye. So that song is a really simple blues in A. It's just got the A, the D, and the E chord. And this is the one where you're paying attention to the 7th chord in the sheet music. It's not A, it's A7. And it's not D. It's D7. Of you, oh, you wanna badly. You really got a hold on me. You really got a hold on me. I love you, and all I want you to do is just hold me, hold me, hold me. So another strong song in the key of A. So that's a piano solo in the introduction. So that's the ostinato bass pattern. It's a repeating bass, and it's pretty key to the tuning because of the open strings. So you got all these open strings. So we pretty much know relative to this tuning what key that's in. And I think it's probably composed on the guitar and then transferred to the piano, but it could have been composed on the piano and just happens to play well on the piano, on the guitar. And so the progression, it's got the A and the E minor, and then it's just an interesting progression: G, E minor, D, D7, then G, E minor, A, and then this ascending minor progression. So it's like A minor plus 5, A minor 6, A minor 7, and then the same thing on the D chord. D minor plus 5, D minor 6, D minor 7. So again, that's the A key, A minor, with its 4 chord in the open position. Song I have in A is one of the last songs they wrote, and it wasn't released until the Beatles anthology came out, and after Lennon, who apparently wrote the song, died, the other Beatles got together and finished the song. And it has a really interesting chord progression. Whatever happened to the life that we once knew? Can we really live without each other? When did we lose that touch that seemed to mean so much? That's always made me feel so free. Home and dry. And then the same song in G. Cry. So that's a little bit harder to play because you come down to the D minor, which is below the open E minor position, and you have to resort to this chord, or you have to go up to here. And so it's harder to sing, but one thing I like about it is the way that E sustained is on that open position chord. So I think when they were composing it, they're moving it up and down the neck to try and find not only the best place to sing it, but the best place for the chords. And they may adjust the guitar intonation so that that key, that's the best key, will be suitable for singing. Because of the cross note effect in this minor tuning, where the top strings look like they're in one tuning and the bottom strings look like they're in a different tuning, and creates this split where you're constantly confused about how to name the chord. And if you just think inside of the tuning, that this isn't a problem. But when you're comparing the tuning to a recording, or when you want to achieve a specific key, like a key signature in music that you're reading, then you have this problem, because if you have A minor, and this is open D minor, so A minor is at the 7th fret. You also have another A minor, which would be an open E minor that's located here. So this A minor, I see the top as though it looks like B minor in standard tuning. And I see the bottom, it looks like A in drop D, or a D family tuning. And then this chord, I see this one as being G minor on the top, but A on the bottom. And so when you hear the A minor key in a record, you're always thinking in this tuning, and really this happens in every other tuning, but it's not so dramatic. You're always thinking, is this the A minor that you play here, or the one you play here? Because they behave in different ways. So to illustrate this, I want to show two songs by George Harrison where the observed key in the recording is A minor, and then show how he probably plays them on guitar. I always find that George Harrison's compositions are the most interesting on guitar. When you look at the chords in the sheet music, they often seem to be sort of just generic everyday chords that everybody else uses, but when you figure out how he actually plays them, that it really lights up the composition as the guitar jewel that his songs are. So in I Me Mine, the key looks in this tuning like it's G minor. So in a standardized reference where every guitar is considered to be intonated at D, the key of I Me Mine would be G minor. And so the lead introduction it's always hard to copy George Harrison's single note leads, because if they don't have an open note in them, what happens is there's so many possibilities about how to play a series of single notes up the neck that you're kind of overwhelmed by the possibilities, and at the same time it doesn't make a whole lot of difference how you're playing the single notes. Now the tuning certainly makes a difference, but whether you play the notes here or here can be kind of obscure and require a lot of consideration. So I'm not sure if I have the intro right. reason I like that, you can play the same thing in A minor. There's a subtle difference, but the main difference comes when you go up to the 4 chord. In A minor, the 4 chord is at the 12th fret, or the open position, and then the 5 chord is 2 steps ahead of it. So, and I think you can tell on the record that the 4 chord is here and the 5 chord is in the open position, but it's not that significant. But what's important to understand is that the way the chords march up the neck in that voice leading progression. And I'm not sure, but the way that I interpret it is the first verse is going through this B flat. And then F, G minor. And then the second verse, instead of playing the B flat, it's playing a C. So So that creates a kind of an interesting tension where the first time the voice leading progression goes from F, G minor, and then the second time it starts 1 chord back. So this is one of these things where they're mixing up the 2 bar chords, the 1 finger bar chord, F, and the 2 finger bar chord, C, and they're voiced differently, and so what happens is they create a chromatic progression in the bass line. Like in the song like Dreamers Do in the introduction. And so that also is an interesting aspect of something, which is in the key of C that I'll get to eventually. Now, to compare that, I want to look at While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And of course, everyone plays that in A minor in standard tuning, in the sort of form that like Bert Jansch's Angie, where you have the A minor chord, then you add the G with your little finger, or possibly like a C chord, and then that goes down on the D7, and then down to the F, and possibly to the E7. So that's A minor, A/G, D7, F. So, the A minor key in standard tuning is very powerful. It really rocks. And it's certainly the best in the class for a song like Angie, but there is an A minor in open G that you hear in, say, like Led Zeppelin's I'm Leaving You, Babe. And so I know I get a lot of resistance about whether While My Guitar Gently Weeps is in open D minor, but I think it's certainly worth a consideration. And the way it works is while my So comparing that to standard tuning, this A minor slash G, D7, F. That's a very, very cool chord progression. And also it has a lot of variations. Like, well, the A minor chord is easy to play as a bar. And then the A slash G, you have that, you can move the note down on the bass string or on the third or the fourth string. Or another variation is, and then this D7 is a really cool D7, and it can be also break down to, you can't expose this string because that's the F, not the F sharp, but you can play this in a number of different variations. And then the F also has like an open position F. So that progression is easily varied in a number of expressive ways. And then when you come to the chorus, it changes from A minor to A major, and so you have this. Those chords are harder to match in standard tuning. You don't end up with the facile, the easy to play 6-string chords. Now, in order to make the case that the Beatles' "While My Guitar Gently Weeps" is in A minor, I want to provide some context for other songs that are in A minor that are useful as a comparison. And you may think that the key of A minor is the key of A minor wherever it occurs. But in fact, on any instrument, the key is bound by the lowest and the highest note. So there's an order imposed on it in addition to just the tonal center that can move up and down. Because as the tonal center moves up and down, the boundaries remain the same, and so there's always a lowest note which has no predecessor and a highest note, and so that defines each key as somewhat different. And on the guitar, the difference between keys is magnified. Now, the keys can be ranked in order. So if you take all of the A minor keys in every tuning, we can rank them in order for their usefulness. And I think that the key of A minor in open D, or the key of B minor in open E minor, because those are the same, those are the go-to tunings when you have a song in A minor or B minor. Some of them work out really well in standard, like the Counting Crows' Mr. Jones and Angie, and a lot of other songs work out really well in standard. But when you compare it to A minor in open D, you realize that the chords A minor in the open position, D, they're somewhat harmonically impaired, and it's difficult to get that 6-string rock sound. You can get more of a classical or finger style where you're playing 2 or 3 notes at a time, but it's harder to get the 6-string chords. Now that I've lost everything to you, I want to find someone new, but you're breaking my heart, you're leaving. Baby, I'm leaving. But if you want to go, take good care. Hope you have a lot of nice things to wear. Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild road. Always remembering like a child. Stevens is a big fan of open D minor. And then there's the Hotel California progression, which I start off with the chord spacing version. That's a really interesting progression, but it's a little bit hard to remember. I had to keep looking at the chord chart because the chords are kind of spaced in a weird way. But then you compare that to the voice leading progression. So if you transcribe that music for piano, or using the usual scoring system with a key signature and a clef sign, what happens is you confine that tonality to a single degree of freedom. So the pitch can only go up or down. There's no other direction that it can travel. And so that means that when you try and understand those chords in that one-dimensional context, you cannot explain that progression. Because in this progression, first of all, each chord is confined to a 2-octave span. From the bottom to the top, that's 2 octaves. And the chord, each note in the progression moves progressively down, usually by like 1 semitone, sometimes 2, but only 1 or 2, and the paths never cross. They just go straight down the strings to the bottom. So you have this powerful descending motion where all of the notes are going down. Now if you transcribe that on piano, what happens is that the voices cross, because on this I have the tonic here, tonic, third, tonic on the top string, third, tonic, third. So when you lay those out in one line, because you can take the notes in this square. The square goes from here down to here. You can take those notes and map them out on one line. But what happens is they will no longer move down progressively. So this is an example of what you call a utility graph problem, where, say, if you have 3 utility companies that want to supply 3 houses with 3 utility lines, then how do you diagram that in a way that the lines don't cross? And what happens is if you do it in a piece of paper, you cannot find a path where the 3 lines won't cross at least once. But if there's another dimension, if the lines can move out of the plane of the paper, then they can go to 3 houses without crossing. So that's what's happening here, is that you have a third direction that notes can travel. And so when you try and represent that progression on the piano, you really can't capture the tonality of the expression that's moving in 6 dimensions. And now that I've kissed your breast, oh baby, how can I prove to you never lose if I ever have? I love you, though the stars may fade and the mountains turn into sand. I love you, So there he's using that same progression that we saw in Hotel California, but he's going up. Now, Stairway to Heaven is an iconic A minor song, and everyone plays it in A minor, but the chords are a little bit challenged, and I want to show you why A minor in open D minor wins. So the general progression for Stairway to Heaven is one of these descending, voice-leading minor progressions. It's A minor, that's A flat augmented, the same thing as E augmented, which A flat augmented, or in the sheet music E augmented, then C, and then that would go down on this chord, which they substituted for with a D7. And then coming down to the F major 7. Now this major 7 comes off of this F chord, but this is an F tonic and it goes down 1 and you have a major 7. So it's a very nice major 7 chord because it's 1 bar and 1 finger, and it has an interesting voice because the 3rd is in the bass here in the major, and then the tonic here. So you get like this Neil Young song. And that chord appeared in I Me Mine, where it's playing the A minor here in the open E minor, and then he has the F going down on the A minor. So in Stairway to Heaven, that chord progression is slightly augmented, or slightly embellished rather. So, comparing that to standard, you have this nice 6-string G, A minor. So these are 6-string chords, and they're concert voicing in terms of 4-part harmony, and they just rock more than in standard tuning. Now in Rhiannon, I'm playing off of this A minor, which is kind of trippy, because when you look at this, it doesn't look like an A minor, but you recognize that part's like an A minor in standard, but then this looks like B minor. And so what happens is, in this tuning, the notes are 2 frets above where they would be in standard tuning, at least on the top 3 strings. And so when you hear the notes in the record, you place them 2 frets lower on the guitar than they are in this tuning. And the other thing that you can't realize in standard tuning is have the double stops here. And it's not just that it doesn't go all the way down to that note, but it's also that you don't realize the double stops are also here. And this double stop has an open position. So what happens is you basically have those double stops on three sets of them, and you kind of mix and match whether you want it here or and then the other chord is C. In the Doors song, Love Her Madly, that the chords are just the sort of A minor, D7, G, C, F generic chords. But there's one part that that's a little bit tricky, where it goes, all your love is gone, all your love is gone, all your love is gone. So I'm lonely song, on the deep blue dream, seven horses see, on the mark. So when you get to that, and then there's like each chord is lasting like 2 or 4 or measures or longer, and then all of a sudden those chords F, D, G, E, A, and there's just a head spinning how fast those chords go by. So when you're trying to play them standard, you have the F chord with 4 fingers, then you have the D, which is, you can't really get the harmonically correct D, and then the back up to the G, because you want this G chord, not this one with the third in the bass. You want this one, and then you have to go back to the E and up to the A7. So the density of these chords is not available to you in standard tuning. These chords are packed in here tighter than they are in standard, and it's sort of like you look at it as if you have A minor, G, F. So those are like the typical minor modality in rock music, as opposed to the A minor, D, E7 minor modality. So what happens is it's kind of like whether the 4 chord is a minor or a 7 chord that determines the mode. And that's how I think the Beatles look at it. They're looking at the 4 chord and saying, is that a minor or a major chord? But they're not looking at the mode and saying, well, let's play in the Mixodylian mode, or let's play in the Aeolian mode. Those modes just follow naturally from the chord progressions, and the chord progressions are inside the tuning. So that's what makes A minor different in open D minor from standard tuning, is because the key is defined inside of the tuning, and you can't know anything about the key without exploring it in the context of the tuning, because the keys on guitar are independent of the pitch. And they don't actually depend on whether it's A minor or not. They depend on whether it's the minor chord at the 7th fret or at the 5th fret. All the leaves are brown and the sky is gray. I've been for a walk on a winter's day. I'll be safe and warm dreaming on such a winter's day. Stopped into a church I passed along the way. Oh, I got down on my knees and I began to pray. Preacher like a crow, he knows I'm gonna stay. California dreaming on such a winter's day. So the standard version of that is very strong, and the jury might still be out on which one is. But I have to say the standard one is a more jazzy sound because you end up using the minor seventh instead of the B minor. And I also think that John Phillips was a user of open D minor, particularly in Me and My Uncle, at least is how the Dead plays it. You can hear that final chord is definitely an open E minor sounding chord. And then All Along the Watchtower is interesting because I think it actually is in B minor, the true B minor relative to this standard open D. And then from the Layla album, I am yours, however distant you may be. Devils know when, but that's your sand to me. That sings no good.